Hello, God bless, and welcome to another exciting episode of Eyes on Anime, and I am your host, Muten Roby. Let's jump right into our fourth episode of this series, fourth episode being Cowboy Bebop. This is our quick overview of this series, spoiler-free of course, so feel free to watch this as we go through, and if you don't feel like getting anything spoiled, stop at the end of this. Without further ado, Cowboy Bebop is a thrilling space western set in a futuristic world where humanity has colonized the solar system. The series follows the adventures of a ragtag group of bounty hunters, Spike Spiegel, Jet Black, Faye Valentine, Edward, and their trusty data dog, Ein. Almost each episode in this series is a standalone story, showcasing the crew's attempts to capture bounties while grappling with their own personal demons and past traumas. Spike, the laid-back and skilled martial artist, is haunted by his mysterious past and a lost love. Jet, the grizzled ex-cop turned ship captain, struggles with his sense of justice and morality. Faye, the sassy and enigmatic femme fatale, grapples with amnesia and her search for identity. Edward, the eccentric hacker genius, adds an element of whimsy to the group with her quirky antics. Last but not least, of course, there's Ein, our data dog, who is, you always need a helpful pet to tag along. Against the backdrop of a vibrant and diverse universe filled with eccentric characters and intricate world building, the Bebop crew navigates through thrilling action sequences, intense shootouts, and mind-bending mysteries. As they chase bounties and confront their own demons, they form unlikely bonds and confront the ghosts of their pasts. But lurking beneath the surface of their adventures are deeper themes of loneliness, existentialism, and the consequences of past choices. As the series unfolds, the Bebop crew finds themselves entangled in a web of conspiracies and personal vendettas that culminate in a gripping and unforgettable finale. With its stylish animation, eclectic soundtrack, blending jazz and blues and complex characters, Cowboy Bebop is a timeless masterpiece that transcends genres and captivates audiences with its blend of action, drama, and philosophy. Get ready to embark on a thrilling journey through space where every bounty brings the crew one step closer to confronting their own destinies. You can't tell me that doesn't sound sick and extremely captivating and doesn't get you hype. So stick tuned if you would like to watch and listen to my in-depth summary, there are spoilers, of Cowboy Bebop, starting with Session 1. As I stated, we start our series off with Session 1, titled Asteroid Blues. This episode starts off with sad music, and our protagonist, even though we don't fully know that yet, but it is our protagonist, walking away from us, the viewers. There's a rose in a puddle, a silhouette of gunfire, to also include a grenade, a smirk from Spike, and boom, our intro. Flying through space, we meet Spike and Jet aboard a ship. Team of space bounty hunters that are broke. That's who Spike and Jet start off as. This is the start of our series. And these are our two first characters introduced into the crew. The first bounty that we're presented with is a man named Asimov, a seller of something known as Red Eye or Bloody Eye, a street drug that grants enhanced ocular perception and reaction time, obviously with there being drawbacks. Investigation is done by both Spike and Jet, and ultimately Spike has a chance encounter with Katarina, Asimov's wife. We end up finding Asimov and Katarina again as the episode climaxes, beautifully of course. This episode establishes the world and starts off with tons of love by way of design, animation, and of course beautiful music, top tier voice acting, and interesting characters. Episode 1 also showed that this series has deep themes that we will be exploring not only in this first episode but throughout the entirety of this series. Session 2 is titled The Stray Dog Strut. Starts off with a fella named Abdul beating up multiple other fellas in a bathroom. they ran up and they, in fact, got done up. He's a pet thief, and he stole a science animal. This is actually the episode where we get Ein introduced into the crew. So the guys, our guys, Jet and Spike, are after the bounty for the funds, of course, because they're broke. And Abdul is attempting to sell what he stole post-haste until Spike somehow ends up in a foot chase with Abdul in a truck filled with scientists, all of which are chasing after this corgi, except Spike, who wants solely just the bounty. Spike ends up with the corgi somehow, as these things tend to play out. We also find out why everyone is so interested in the dog in the first place. As I mentioned, it's a data dog, so you can kind of assume what that entails. It's a dog that has data capabilities and can hack and stuff like that. This episode gets wrapped up perfectly with a final encounter of the scientists, Spike, and our bounty, Abdul. Yet another episode filled with amazing music, amazing voice acting, and immersion into this rich, unique universe. If you haven't noticed, our episodes are not called episodes, they're actually called sessions. Sticking with the theme of music, Session 3 is titled Honky Tonk Woman. This is also where we meet Faye Valentine. She gets introduced to the crew. She becomes one of the members, obviously. Early on, we meet a woman that's clearly in too deep with her gambling, Faye. We also see our fellas Spike and Jet entering a casino, where Faye is. We learn a bit about Spike from Jet saying Spike can't play because they will get kicked out. His eyes are too good. So that's a little something that gets touched on later on in the future. Little tidbit of information towards Spike, his character, and what makes him special. Spike mistakenly gets tangled up in this random woman, Faye, and her random dealings and shenanigans ensue. Poker chips play a huge hand in this episode, so much so that Spike swallows one. We also find out the woman's name, again, Faye, now has a bounty out on her, and she has somehow ended up on the ship of the Bebop. That's the name of Jet's ship, the Bebop. We conclude with Faye, Spike, and Jet having an epic showdown with the ones who put the bounty on Faye, who ends up also being the ones searching for the poker chip that our boy Spike had this entire time that he ingested. Session 4 is titled Gateway Shuffle. It opens with Faye stranded in space hitchhiking. However that works. We'll find out in the future, I guess. She's trying to get to Ganymede, and we also see the fellas on Ganymede currently stalking their next bounty. So they had split up at the end of the previous episode. This leads us to meeting Mama, is our bounty, if you will. And Mama don't play about her sea rats, let me tell you. Mama, also known as Twinkle Marie Murdoch, gets captured by Spike and Jet, while Faye oversees delivering an important message / object to the space police. There's regular Earth police, Ganymede police, now we got space police. So when the message gets sent to the space police, Spike and Jet find Faye stranded in space in possession of said strange object, where we later learn is a virus called monkey business. It's actually the name of the virus. Pretty cool. It explains itself throughout the episode, as you'll soon see. Our episode concludes with a hostage exchange, an angered mama, frenzied scientists / police, a space chase, and more monkeying around from all parties involved. Session 5 is titled Ballad of Fallen Angels. We are introduced to the Red Dragon Clan, coming into an agreement with another syndicate. Red Dragon Clan is an underground crime syndicate, clearly. It seems like that. It even sounds like it. So, shouldn't have to elaborate too much more. We are also introduced to a ruthless killer, and we learn Spike has ties to this world, this underground world with the Red Dragon Clan and these syndicates. Spike is tied to this. We learn that here in this episode, very early on, actually. Spike seems pressed to find a bounty. The bounty in this episode is Mao Yin Rai. Say that 10 times fast. Spike background story, maybe? I think so. We meet someone named Annie, who is shocked to see Spike, and who says that Spike has come back to life after dying 3 years prior. Definitely a Spike background story episode, which is great. We find out what happened to this Mao Yin Rai, our bounty, as well as Faye winds up in the clutches of a man named Vicious, also tied to this Red Dragon clan. We find out Vicious and Spike have history, very deep history. We get to see Spike's conviction towards settling his debts and getting past / over his past, which has caught up to him. Vicious, Faye, Spike, and Jet are all tangled up in this backstory filled with action, and you do not want to miss the music and how this episode ends. It is absolutely phenomenal. One of the better episodes in the series, and it starts the upward tick of many of our bigger moments in the series. This is where many things start, if you will. Session 6 is titled Sympathy for the Devil. We see a daydream, or flashback even, of Spike getting surgery on an eye. It's his right eye. But we don't know what the surgery is for. The team is trailing a new bounty called Giraffe, who is taking someone named Zebra. We got animal names now. We had Monkey Business a couple episodes ago. Anyway, the team is trailing a new bounty called Giraffe, who is trailing someone named Zebra until something tragic happens to our bounty. We slowly figure out how Zebra and the kid play a role in all of this, and the team trails them again. Spike ends up confronting the kid, accompanying Zebra, and he finds out he's not a kid at all, as this is accompanied by a flashback depicting what happened to him, the kid, to make him that way. One of our more mind-bending episodes, if you will. A little bit more far-fetched, but phenomenal nonetheless. The conclusion of our episode climaxes with an altercation between Spike and the kid, as the rest of our group supports as they best know how to collectively solve this conundrum. A beautiful episode from start to finish. This takes us to session number 7. Session 7 is titled Heavy Metal Queen. We hear phenomenal heavy metal coming from a space trucker as we meet a cool character named VT, and hear rumors of some infamous bounty hunter. This time, our bounty the team is hunting is named Decker, and he has a dragon tattoo. VT and Spike end up hitting it off over a good old-fashioned bar fight. Gotta love those. Shortly after, Spike and Faye end up needing to space hitchhike. Second time we've been space hitchhiking in this series. VT's trucker name is Heavy Metal Queen, by the way. Name of the episode. Everything gets wrapped up, starting with an explosive space chase, followed by a life or death situation which presents itself to multiple members of our cast. Wits are needed to escape a tragic fate. Session number 8, Waltz for Venus. It's our title. We find ourselves on a train to Venus when it begins to get robbed. Luckily, Faye and Spike are present to stop the bounties they were after. Spike ends up getting a student, Rocco, unwillingly because his skills shown in the train, who ends up bolting, but while also leaving Spike with a suspicious bag holding a plant called Gray Ash. It's the name of the plant. Spike ends up meeting Rocco's younger sister at the meeting place that he and Rocco had designated, and we learn why he does what he does and who he does them for. Specifically talking about Rocco here. It's quite touching, and it's something beautiful. Rocco's dealings finally catch up to him, however, in a bad way that threatens his sister, and Faye is sent on a wild goose chase. Tons of wild goose chases present in this series, clearly. Bullets start flying and the music gets jumping in our climax of this episode. We see shootouts, judo, sadness, and so much more. Tune in to see how Rocco's story concludes, what happens to his sister, and the implications that this has on Spike. Session number 9 is titled Jamming with Edward, and we finally get the last member of the Bebop crew, Ed. Lasers are being fired from satellites into a random desert, creating what's called land carvings, as they're titled in this episode. We then immediately see a hacker kid, Edward, laying outside, almost destroyed by a meteor just comes crashing into the ground. The hacker ends up getting a bounty of 8 million. So of course our team sets out to go after the hacker, but they have no idea what he or she even looks like. They're kind of just assuming that the hacker's some nerdy looking individual. That's what most people would expect. We learn the hacker's name is Radical Edward, again. And Edward is amazing. That's the easiest way of putting it. Edward hacks into the Bebop ship effortlessly. That's our ship again, the ship that Spike, Faye, Ein, and Jet are on. So he hacks into the ship effortlessly while the team is out searching for information on Ed, him, what he looks like, what he does, this, that, and the third. But they're getting erratic and random information surrounding Ed. Like, no one knows what this radical Edward looks like. All the while, again, Ed is still just over here doing Edward things, hacking the Bebop, this, that, and the third. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Ed is quite amazing. The plot expands as Edward finds a new friend in space. Edward pops up on our crew, and lastly, we figure out how the lasers are being fired, creating these land carvings. We also find out Edward's new friend. We know who that is once we near the end of this episode. And we also figure out how all of this plays into the conclusion of this session. Session number 10 is titled Ganymede Elegy. We open with some humor, followed immediately by Jet daydreaming of past events concerning a locket watch of his tied to a past love, mayhaps. Starting to look more and more like a Jet episode the further you get into it, very early on actually, but Jet episode, definitely looking forward to this one. As it's mentioned, he used to be a cop, and the name Elisa randomly pops, well, it doesn't randomly pop up, it pops up throughout this episode, and that name startles him. Jet is the him that I'm speaking of. Jet then takes a trip to see Elisa to catch up, considering he's home. And a memory shared over the locket seems special, and we find out Elisa's now boyfriend has a bounty on his head, which clearly complicates this situation even further. Jet finally seeks answers from Elisa concerning how things ended between them. This backstory-filled episode starts to climax as Spike zeroes in on Jet's location and the location of the bounty, aka Elisa's boyfriend, and in turn, Elisa. Jet decides he must settle this situation on his terms, moving beyond his past, his feelings, and into his sorry, not sorry era. Session number 11 is titled Toys in the Attic. This episode opens with Jet opening the show talking about life of a broke bounty hunter, which our bounty hunters are. They're very, very much broke all throughout the entirety of this series so far. Then he and Faye are shown intensely gaming as we also hear a strange sloshing sound on the Bebop. Kind of like ocean water swirling around, I guess. We start learning some lessons as alarms start blaring and Jet's been bit by some random thing. The crew runs to his aid, which Ein seems to be the only one privy to what's going on. It's the only one, the dog. Ein is our data dog. Whatever this bite is seems bad enough, considering Jet is badly poisoned by something not found in the ship's database. Ed thinks the culprit is no rat, but instead a horrible space monster. Of course. Again, this is an episode about strange lessons to be prepared for. Find out who comes out on top in this fight for life among the stars as this one-off Cowboy Bebop episode ends. Always remember, don't leave things in the fridge. Don't leave things in the fridge. Session number 12. So session number 12 and session number 13 flow into one another. Session 12 is titled Jupiter Jazz Part 1. Session 13 is titled Jupiter Jazz Part 2. So we're going to go straight from Jupiter Jazz Part 1 directly into Jupiter Jazz Part 2, everything that we've got here so far. So Jupiter Jazz Part 1 opens, we hear chanting, and shortly after we hear Vicious speaking with some underworld members about Lord knows what. Can't fully understand what they're exactly talking about. Our team is looking for Faye, and the name Julia pops up, and Spike is extremely interested in this as he rushes off. We end up at the Blue Crow, where Faye ends up being, and coincidentally Spike is heading that way looking for Julia. Faye gets tied up with a high-cost bounty named Grincia. Spike also has an alleyway fight after he was mistakenly called Vicious. He did not like that. He beat the brakes off this fella. Do not compare Spike to Vicious. Spike and Vicious finally have another face-to-face encounter, and it's understood that Julia was the code name for Vicious's drug deal. So Spike was not necessarily lured there, but the name wasn't the Julia Spike was looking for. It was just the name that was being used for this specific drug deal that Vicious had planned out. Part 1 then ends with Faye realizing a shocking truth about Grencia, and Spike presumably being shot down by Vicious. Part 2 opens with Grencia and Faye. They're starting off the show with a conversation that leads to a flashback of Grin and Vicious. Jet strolls into the Blue Crow, that was the bar from the first part 1 of Jupiter Jazz. So Jet strolls into the Blue Crow and asks about Faye, which leads to more flashbacks of Julia, Vicious, and Spike. Julia the person, not Julia the drug deal. Jet continues searching for Faye and ends up at a blue apartment building where he finds her handcuffed to a bed. Faye is handcuffed to a bed, not Julia. I know I might be getting a little confusing here. So Jet finds Faye handcuffed to a bed in a blue hotel. The drug handoff is established between Grencia and Vicious, while Grin gets the drop on Vicious due to not knowing he was now different. We'll leave it at that. Spike interrupts the party in heroic fashion as we end the episode with an intense spaceship showdown and some ending revelations for a few characters. Another episode that I could say is tied to Spike specifically, his storyline throughout this entire series. So episode 5, 12, and 13 are Spike heavy episodes. Session number 14 is titled Bohemian Rhapsody. Our crew all comes back with chess pieces after catching bounties with no reward. That's just what they found on the bounties. They decide to pool their information together, and Ed finds out something interesting with the chess pieces, while Jet finds out about someone named Chess Master Hex. The crew ends up tracing Hex's signal out into space, while Ed continues a virtual chess match with this person. No one else really even knows that this is happening, just really Ed. They finally end up finding Hex, but it's not at all what they thought it was going to be, or who they thought it was going to be. Tune into this episode to find out how this turns out, the confusion, and the climax of this episode. Session number 15 is titled My Funny Valentine. So, of course, you can guess it is going to be a Faye Valentine episode, giving us some backstory on her. We get flashbacks of Faye being unfrozen, and we learn she's come to an extensive amount of debt. That's what she fell into, a lot of debt. And she's technically 74 years old. She was cryogenically frozen and then unfrozen in the future to pay for these debts. As I had stated in the very beginning, it's a Faye-heavy background episode that focuses on coping with being in the future. So the initial elements of her being in the future, her coping with those things, the financial burden that she's put under. Like I mentioned, she's got this huge, immense debt that she now has to pay back. But most importantly, this episode focuses on a man that Faye loved. So we get a little bit more personal with Faye. This episode ends in a funny fashion of things coming full circle from Faye's past and converging now into the future, 74 years later into the future, mind you. Session number 16 is titled Black Dog Serenade. This is a Jet episode. We start off with murder as inmates take over a prisoner transport ship. Jet gets his shine as we start to see why he quit the police force. Again, he used to be a cop. Why he became a bounty hunter and what happened to his arm. You can see Jet's got a fake arm, robo-arm, prosthesis, if you will. It's heavily centered around Uday, who turns out set up Jet in the past. We learn more about Uday throughout this episode. Jet and his old partner jump on the trace of Uday and pursue him intergalactically. Another space chase, if you will. Jet plunges headfirst into stop this rogue inmate being led by Uday. So Uday started this whole outbreak and everything that's taking place in this episode. And then we ultimately get the fated showdown between Uday and Jet. It's inevitable, and there are a few other plot twists and turns that happen here, as the conclusion is exciting and electric with a phenomenal music score. Another thing that can't be stated enough is the musical score throughout the entirety of this series seems tailored for every single episode. Session number 17 is titled Mushroom Samba. Some goofball, goofy goober, whatever you want to call him, he crashes into the Bebop. And our crew, starving crew, they're always starving because they're poor, ends up crashing on a planet. Ed and Ein end up going in search for food, and they find the hit and run ship unexpectedly flying around, and they get mixed up in some random mushroom bounty. A bounty centered around actual mushrooms. The crew ends up getting a hold of some mystery mushrooms, and of course they eat them, and they trip. These aren't just edible mushrooms, they're the magic kind. The episode is hilarious and ultimately just a fun ride to enjoy. So you gotta enjoy the ride, and remember, people, eat your shrooms responsibly. Come on now. Session number 18 is titled Speak Like a Child. This is a huge episode for Faye right here. Before I even get into it, I will let you know right now, I teared up quite a bit. I didn't cry a lot, but I teared up quite a bit, even after seeing this so many times. Every time it gets me. Let's dive into this. Faye takes off when she receives something in the mail, and Spike ends up opening it in her stead. And what we see is a beta cassette tape, but we don't know what is on it. Faye takes off because she thinks like it's more debt, this, that, and the third. She doesn't want to have anything to deal with this, right? So our fellas go through great lengths to attempt to sell this beta cassette tape for any amount of money that they can get. And they also want to find out, kind of what's on it, but since they don't know what it is, they can't figure out what's on it. Ultimately, we see into the past of Faye through this beta cassette tape. But of course, Spike ends up finding some way to ruin this with his usual antics, MC problems, if you will. Our fellas now start to pursue the remainder of the tape because they started some of it and now they want to finish it. They know it's a tape about Faye. So our fellas now start to pursue the remainder of the tape again. And Faye is just off doing what she does, gambling, acquiring more debt as she does. Again, this is clearly a Faye-centered episode. I don't want to spoil it too much for you guys. It ends absolutely beautifully. This is an episode you don't want to miss and you cannot miss in this series. Absolutely amazing. Session number 19 is titled Wild Horses. Spike lands on a desert planet while Faye, Jet, and Edward are staking out against some space pirates. They're doing a space stakeout, if you will. Spike gets a ride from Miles, who is a talkative cohort of another person named Doohan. Someone that Spike knows. Spike knows Doohan. He doesn't know the Miles character, but since Miles works for Doohan, he's cool with it. We learn that Doohan built Spike's ship, and Spike's ship used to be a racer ship, very specially designed racer ship, and it's tuned specifically for, you guessed it, Spike. Doohan seems to be straight-laced and very direct, the no BS type of mechanic. The crew seems to be getting outsmarted by these space pirates, while Spike is still in the process of getting his ship fixed and reflecting on his relationship with Doohan and the ship. We get an intermingling of the crew's story with Spike and Doohan as the episode begins to heat up. Spike shows off his phenomenal piloting skills and ability to remain cool, calm, and collected when necessary, pretty much always. This episode climaxes when Doohan being awesome as expected. This episode climaxes with Doohan being awesome, as you would expect. Tune in to watch the magic and see how this concludes. Session number 20 is titled Pierrot La Foy. I probably said that wrong. I did my best. But it's titled Pierrot La Foy. A guy is flying around killing people, as some of these episodes start off as. He even takes numerous life-threatening shots, punches, and kicks at Spike until he gets spooked by a cat while Spike is blasted into a harbor. So this guy was going hands up with our combat-hardened Spike, right? So this guy's got some moves. Jet is introduced to the name of Mad Pierrot as we see Spike recovering, because, again, Spike got beat up, and Faye's poking at him. Obviously, Faye likes to mess with Spike. We then get the full description / history of Mad Pierrot, and he is quite the assassin. Let me tell you, his hit streak is quite phenomenal. I don't think he's ever missed a bounty. He's a very well-designed character as well. Spike accepts an invitation from Mad Pierrot to finish what was started because, like I said, Pierrot is 100% kill rate. So Spike is going, he ain't no punk. So they go to this place called Spaceland to settle this duel. Thus, the mad climax and rematch of Spike versus the assassin Mad Pyro begins. What tactics could a still injured Spike have up his sleeve to defeat someone of this caliber? And how can the crew of the Bebop assist Spike in making it out of this alive? You're gonna have to tune in to see how this one unfolds. It's quite phenomenal, and you're gonna love it. One of the more action-packed episodes from beginning to end, if you will. Session number 21 is titled Boogie Woogie Feng Shui. Immediately we know this is a Jet-focused episode. Finally, love the Jet-focused episodes. Jet encounters a young woman and inadvertently starts getting shot at while at a cemetery visiting one of his old friend's gravestones, who is a Feng Shui master. That's what they say, not my words from the show. Meifa is the name of this young girl, and it turns out to be his old friend's daughter, the one he was visiting the grave site, that guy's daughter. Jet then gives her the message that began all this entire episode, and she shares a bit, and suddenly Jet starts helping Meifa, like along her quest, whatever her quest may be, which we learn shortly thereafter is the quest for the Sunstone, as they both share more throughout the process, and we'll learn about the art of Feng Shui. Pieces oddly start falling into place as Jet and Meifa stumble upon the Sunstone, only to cause trouble to loom and ensue for the duo. We also find out that Meifa's father might actually be alive. Who knew? The plot really begins to thicken as we begin to round out this episode and reach the climax of Jet's backstory episode. Another one. Second Jet backstory episode. What becomes of Meifa? What happened to her father, Pow? Lastly, how does Jet and Feng Shui all fit into this? We don't even know what Feng Shui is, you know? There's a climactic conclusion with a phenomenal episode. Further rounds out our cast and crew throughout the entirety of this journey. Yet another episode you don't want to miss. It provides much needed backstory for one of our main cast members. You're going to love it. Absolutely going to love it. Session number 22 is titled Cowboy Funk. Apparently, as far as bounty hunting goes, bounties dread being caught by two individuals. Those two individuals being Spike and Andy. We haven't heard of Andy this entire time, but we hear about him in this one. The resemblance between the two being in the damage that they caused and the beatdown that they put on these bounties. Spike and Andy apparently are not generous or easy with their fists when it comes to the bounty, so no one wants to get caught by them because it's going to be painful. This episode is a hilarious cycle of Andy and Spike versus an actual bounty called Teddy the Bomber being sidelined amongst the Spike and Andy feuds. Like Teddy the Bomber is secondary, tertiary, if you will, to the Andy and Spike feud. Ultimately, it's two idiots struggling again and again and again and again to witless ends. It's a humor-filled episode. One of the funnier episodes in the series. And I'll leave it with this tagline: "See you, Space Samurai." It all makes sense when you watch it. Session number 23 is titled Brain Scratch. Scratch, essentially a cult / scam, is scattered across multiple TV stations. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing TV feeds of this cultish thing called Scratch. We ultimately stumble upon a channel 247 and we see Faye in a Scratch commercial. Or ad, whatever you want to call it. What is her purpose? So far we don't know what her purpose in doing this is, but we will find out. The fellas then begin to investigate it for themselves, alongside everyone else looking for the man behind Scratch. That guy's name being Dr. Landis. Spike checks in on Faye's whereabouts as Jet, Ein, and Edward track down Landis, or whatever Landis is. Whoever, whatever, wherever Landis is. The episode expounds into deeper, more thought-provoking ideas surrounding technology being bad, but also much more deep themes theologically. Questions of morality, good versus evil, right versus wrong. This episode is beautifully crafted and resolved eloquently. And we also see the sad ending of our favorite bounty hunter show, Big Shots. Farewell, Big Shots. Session number 24 is titled Hard Luck Woman. Ed and Faye are seen watching the tape from Faye's past when Ed mentions she knows the location of the waterfall depicted in the video. It's again a Faye backstory episode, and we end up back on Earth, which we don't spend a lot of time on Earth throughout any of these episodes, but this is another one where we're back on Earth. Somehow Ed stumbles upon people here that know who she is. Ed is a she. They know who she is. And it also seems kind of like an Ed backstory episode as well, which you could definitely take that away from this as well. The journey through Ed's life and its collusion with Faye's story continues in search of this waterfall from the video that we had watched in the beginning of the episode. This trip to Earth is filled with surprises for Faye and for Ed alike, as Faye learns of an old accident that she was in and an old friend. The fellas are left in the dark as the ladies figure out their individual ways forward, as this episode concludes with a flood of traumatic, recollective realization, fated reunion/separation, and ultimately, our female duo, we feel and even see a sense of destiny and fate at work in these two characters' storylines. Closing one chapter for them, but ultimately opening the next. Sessions number 25 and 26, I'm not going to go too much into because they are the end of this series. It's 26 episodes long, so be wary of that. But the title of the episodes are The Real Folk Blues Part 1 and 2. The main takeaway from the Real Folk Blues Part 1 and 2 is it's the ultimate conclusion of our series. It's the conclusion of Spike Spiegel's story. It's the conclusion of Vicious's story to deal with Spike. It's the conclusion in the summation of everything to deal with Julia. The way the series ends is completely left up to your own interpretation with the ending of this series, episode 26. It's beautifully done. The music is amazing. The choreography in the fights, the choreography in the space chases, everything in these last two episodes is absolutely phenomenal. The two best episodes of the entire series, in my opinion. And without further ado, this leads us into our pros and cons. That wasn't so bad, was it? We just got through 26 episodes of explaining pretty quickly. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying it so far. But let's get into these pros and cons. I like to start off with the cons first. Con number one. There are a few episodes that I feel don't really take the opportunity to capitalize on expounding on characters or on the world building. I guess the easiest way of putting it would be there's just a little too many standalone episodes in this series for me personally. Even viewing it unbiased, they could have done more by way of characters, world building, plot building, and stuff like that had they included slightly less standalone episodes and just like maybe 3 or 4 more episodes related to character building for Faye, Ed, Jet, or even Spike in like the main story portion. That's our first con. Con number 2 is the series lacks by way of pacing. The pacing is a little askew again with there being so many standalone episodes in the series. The pacing feels off at times. Not that it's a terrible thing, but it doesn't give you a fluidity of story, if you will, at least for the main line of the story. So that's kind of lost as well. Con number 3. This is not particularly a con for me, but it's what I could see as being a con for others. And that being that the series has more of an ambiguous ending. I didn't go into the end of the series because I want you guys to experience that for yourselves. It's a very iconic ending. But I feel like new fans coming into the series, young and old, might be thrown aloof by the ambiguous ending here in this series. It could have been done just slightly better, slightly less ambiguous, and I think it would have been much more inviting to a larger fan base had they had done so. But enough about the cons. How about we get into some of these pros, huh? Pro number 1, I think, kind of like almost anyone would agree, the series music is phenomenal. The musical score for every single episode is among the best in all of anime, any series that I've ever seen. Each episode's ebbs and flows with the music. It seems like the music was perfectly curated for each individual episode going through. The music matches the themes. It matches the plot of each episode. In my opinion, it is the biggest standout of this series, the music. It's phenomenal. I've got absolutely no complaints by way of music, audio, things like that. The voice acting, you could even throw that in there for pro number 1 as well. Pro number 2, I would say the fluidity of animation is absolutely phenomenal. I think for this being a 26-year-old show, came out in 1998, like the way everything moves and the way everything like just works together in this series, it shows that they took a lot of care and time with this series because it still holds up today. I think the fluidity of it and the overall animation quality, pretty top notch, can't be beat. That's pro number 2. Pro number 3, one of my personal favorites. I love the diversity of characters. Me being mixed, I'm half black, half Mexican. Seeing black characters in this series is really profound because they fit in the verse, not as just black characters. Especially you got to consider 1998. This is a Japan series as well. Typically in Japanese media, Japanese anime media, black people, African Americans aren't always depicted like normally like other characters in the series, you know? And this goes for all other ethnicities, races, cultures, and whatnot in this series. They did a really, really good job of including everyone and making everyone feel a part of this verse without having anyone feel set apart. So the diversity in this series is absolutely top-notch. One of the things that you didn't see in a lot of anime back in the day, huge pro for me. Pro number 4, I don't typically do 4, but I feel like I needed to throw this one in there. Pro number 4 is going to be the themes explored in Cowboy Bebop. Amazing. So for its time, and even in today's day and age, the themes that they explore, the sub-themes to go along with the plot and stuff, very, very exceptional, very well thought out. It can be seen from episode to episode that the author of this, the creator, if you will, Shinichiro Watanabe, was attempting to deliver something thought-provoking each episode while also giving all the other essentials to a successful story by way of plot, character development, world building. He made sure to put the themes in there so they perfectly layered with the characters, the plot, the world building, all the development, stuff like that. It was perfectly intertwined into the series. Absolutely phenomenal. The themes in this, sub-themes, amazing. We have reached the end of this review. We are going to first start off with my personal ranking of this series, and then we're going to touch on my unbiased ranking of this series. So, without further ado, my personal ranking of this series, I would have to give it a Sharingan rank. That's my personal opinion of it. Again, I've watched this pretty much once every year for the past like 15 years. I would give it a Sharingan rank from my own purview. I love this series, and I couldn't give it any less than that. I also can't give it any higher than that, but that's my personal ranking of this series. This is what you guys are here for, though. My unbiased ranking of this series. My unbiased ranking of this series is also going to be Sharingan rank. I could see it being Mangekyo Sharingan rank for some. I could see it being Rinnegan rank for some. I could see it being lower than Sharingan rank for some people as well. My unbiased ranking has to be Sharingan because that's taking into consideration all the pros, all the cons, while also taking into the potential for different ages of viewers, like new and old, coming into the series. While this series is exceptional in many ways, the series lacks based on those things that I had stated in the cons. With it only being a 26 episode series, I feel like there should have been a little bit more fleshing out. No matter how deep and amazing the themes were, they lacked by way of those other areas mentioned in the cons. I'm not going to talk about them again, but I'm going to give this Sharingan rank. I feel it's an extremely respectable rank for an anime series that's by many heralded as like one of the most culturally iconic anime series of all time. I think most anime connoisseurs, people who indulge in large amounts of anime, have Cowboy Bebop in their top 10s. So I feel like this is a very respectable rank, Sharingan rank yet again. I have not a lot of bad things to say about it. I have more good than bad to say about it, obviously. So again, my unbiased rank of Cowboy Bebop is going to be a Sharingan rank. Love it or hate it, my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. That is going to do it for this episode of Muten Roby's Eyes on Anime. I pray you all enjoyed this review as much as I enjoyed creating it, and I appreciate all of you for stopping by and all of the support. And until next time, guys, I'll see you on the other side.